January 27th, 2019. So this is a bit of a rant and a confession about what annoys me about Silicon Valley and the wellness industry and the spirituality industry, all of which I've been part of, at least on the periphery, um, but definitely a consumer of a lot of information around. I shouldn't say periphery. I mean, I've invested heavily in wellness trainings and invested years of my life attempting to um, craft authentic marketing messages around it. And here's my discovery about wellness. This is my latest iteration of expressing my practice toward wellness. Um, Wellness is being sold as an endpoint, just like we sell health as an endpoint in the medical industry, um, which we define as the absence of disease. Wellness is attempting to define it as optimization of all aspects of life. And very broadly speaking, including like kindness, generosity, empathy, philanthropy, care for the rest of the world, etc., because it is ultimately an industry that's dominated by ex corporate or ex high driven kind of competitive executives who experience an awakening and are now trying to replace that income doing something good. That's the most cynical way of describing it. It used to be that in the very beginning, and I can't say that I was there in the very beginning. I think that there was a whole wave of this in the 60s and 70s when people started going to India with the Beatles and then coming back and sharing that knowledge with people. But it was done in like the neighborhood health food store, right? The mom and pop shop before Whole Foods became Amazon. But even Whole Foods started as a tiny little health food store in a gas station. Um, so at that time, it was that model where there was no opportunity for that to become an industry. And Whole Foods was really the first one to go there, right? To make it, he read all these business books. He decided that to make an impact, he would have to become big. And so now it's Amazon. And I think Whole Foods has less of an impact now. So what he really meant by making an impact was make his own personal fortune and then, do whatever it is that people do when they have personal fortunes. So it really comes down to this same quest for power that really drives all humans to different degrees. I just read an article sent to me by someone that's trying to sell the idea that she's a female executive who decided she was burned out of Silicon Valley culture that was focused too much on smartphones and went into wellness and now leads these wellness retreats for C-level executives to go to these locations like Bali and Bhutan to experience something. I mean, they don't call it spirituality anymore. It's some kind of wellness. The lingo is changing because it's not like going for ayahuasca ceremony into Peru with a shaman. It's going to supposedly enlighten cultures. And let me tell you about Bali. It's filled with these wellness industry people from all other countries, developed countries that are going there. And you walk down the streets of Ubud and it looks like a previous version of San Francisco with smoothie bars and raw cacao and vegan restaurants that are open by Westerners. And I don't even know what it's like now. I was there 6 years ago now, so it's completely changed, I'm sure. But I talked to one of my friends here who was in Ubud in 1985, and it was like just a dirt road to the monkey forest. And those of you who've been in Ubud know that at least 6 years ago, that those whole 2 streets leading to the monkey forest are completely lined with these shops that I'm talking about. There's a few Balinese people that are still um, running like family jewelry or souvenir shops, but it's rapidly being taken over by wellness industry. So this article quoted like how many billions of dollars the wellness industry has grown to, and anytime Forbes magazine can refer to something as an industry and refer to numbers, it's over. It's time to turn your attention away from that. Unless you're an investor and looking for, another column or row in your spreadsheet. Because the truth of what I'm finding in wellness, it's a very individual journey. It's about tuning in whatever way that is for you. And there are practices out there. This is the crime, is that there are so many practices that contain so many useful ideas and ways to do this. But it's like being at a Target superstore and having all these choices, and you can only take in so much, first of all, before you have decision fatigue, and then you can only put so much in your cart to go home and then incorporate it. And so the wild consumption that drives every single business model that we have, because it's still driven by the same forces of accumulating power, money, influence, and catering to those with wealth and influence, and just building that, because every business model that we have depends on having a pool of people wealthy. So where's that coming from? Nobody's really talking about the fact that we all have to buy into that same power dynamic to get that wealth, to become consumers in those industries. And I look at what are the sacrifices people have to make to get those lives that enable them to stay in positions of power and influence. And those are the roots of our, quote, wellness problems. They throw us into a state of prioritizing power and influence. So we've moved from the pendulum of like prioritizing getting the next meal in times of war to everyone in a quest for power and influence. So for me, it's all been driven, and I'm just going to go back to the Leanna Fink quote from yesterday, that a drawer doesn't draw because she draws well. She doesn't draw because she loves to draw. She draws because once she lost something, and in drawing, she will find it again. So in wellness and spiritual awakening, from my experience, there's some moment where something is lost. And often we can't even name it. And we go on a search, and maybe we call it wellness, that at one point we lost our sense of wellness, and we go on a quest for that. But we can't go about it, I think. I think that the actual essence of that quest is lost if we go about it and we're not actually searching for wellness anymore. We're actually searching for power and influence that is gained through the wellness industry. And because for me, a lot of wellness is and awakening is tied to letting go of the things that we once held precious, and awakening to a new way of organizing our lives and our values and our priorities and our choices and our actions around that new perspective. That now that we can't hold power, influence, and our status at the center of things and organize our lives around protecting that power, influence, and status, what do we do? And we can't imagine, most of us really spend all of our time avoiding the scenario where we would ever have to imagine that. Like, no, my life is around maintaining my own power and influence and status. So, I'm going to keep building my business. I'm going to keep networking. I'm going to keep looking for the growing industries, reading the Forbes magazine and Wall Street Journal, hanging out with wealthy people, trying to gain more influence. And it's like, that's what we hold precious. That's what's in the center of our lives, of our consciousness. And we know when we have to ask ourselves a hard question to actually admit that. Like, that's actually how we're making our decisions. And then we defend it because we have to justify that decision to ourselves and say, we're doing it for our families. We're doing it for some reason that sounds good for us. But ultimately, we prioritize power, influence, and status. So if that's what we're holding precious to us, and then we say, my wellness has to serve that, or I use my power, influence, and status to buy a wellness experience that treats me like an elevated king, in these luxury resorts, and I'm escorted in private vans to see important, special people in these cultures, like even healers who are so true healers also are not in the power, status, and influence game. So if you're buying a luxury tour to see a so-called healer that you've paid a lot of money to see, it's a show. It's show business. So that's the irony that people are in right now. And that's really annoys me. So I'm smiling, yet I'm masking a feeling of disgust and recoil because I've really brought sincerity to my quest for a different paradigm for life, a different way to approach things that's from everything that has conditioned me, from the family unit to the small regional culture to the national culture to the international culture of domination that's ultimately driving so many things. And I really don't care that it's going against, historical forces, but I just know that in my life, it's not sustainable for my own body and for my own sense of who I am to pursue power in these forms, in the forms of wealth, influence, etc., and image and status as encoded by the culture. It doesn't work for me to do that. And then, so the question is, okay, then how do I create a life? And that's the ultimate creative question, I feel. And I that's the one that I'm not giving up on. That I feel that every ounce of whatever's life left of my life force will be dedicated to that creative process of constantly morphing and shape shifting and responding creatively to the moment, and not to be tied up with the measurements that these power structures have given us. So yeah, I have this unique window into people who bought into that as like the only way. Like, once you have it, so this is the challenge. Like, once you have attained a certain amount of power, influence, and status, and you're getting rewarded for it financially and with the attention and adoration and dependency of others on you, maybe in the form of employees, followers, likes, all these things, they're different versions of that same kind of dependency. Once you have it, it's really difficult to give that up. That's the journey of, like, can you stay with whatever it is that is calling you to do in the new path of whatever it is, wellness for you? Can you stay with it as you watch something fall away? And I would say that this happens cyclically in a lifetime. So anyone that were like watching a linear trajectory of a career, rocketing to the moon, that's is that happening? How is it happening for them? And I want to hear those stories. I want to hear stories of people that have been in these worlds and have really given it up and found a way to weave a different way. Not just the old tired paradigm of I was a billionaire and now I'm giving it to people in Africa and like helping them with water or electricity or something. Because that has become another currency where it's like, great, you're a billionaire, which, got you what you got. And then you get to cash in on the social capital of saying, look, I'm such a good person that I got to, help all these people in Africa. Like Africa is such a buzzword now for just where we can dump all of our unwanted clothing, donations. It's like, oh, Marie Kondo convinced me that I have too many belongings. Let me just push them out onto the curb and let someone else deal with it. So then it becomes Goodwill's problem, which if they can't sell that becomes Africa's problem. And then it becomes planet Earth's problem. So that to me is like the awareness that something fundamental in our equation of life and what life is, which I equate with the word wellness. It means so many different things to so many people that it doesn't mean anything anymore. But to me, something so fundamental has to change in our equation about how we think about the interrelatedness of our lives as humans and how we are, and all the way to the health of the planet and the animals that we so love to see on the safaris that we buy with all the money that we make. So these beautiful places on the planet that we want to visit once we have all of our money and our status and our influence are impacted by our pursuit of status, power, and influence through the channels that we have today. So I think it's amazing that there still continues to be billions of dollars in an industry that just is feeding on itself. Maybe it has led to the inclusion of some yoga studios inside the corporate headquarters of tech companies, or a meditation bell that rings once a day inside your cubicle. But let's just back up and say you're still doing the same work in pursuit of the same stuff, exploiting the same resources, and asking and giving people no other options for how to actually organize their lives, not just choose how to spend their money that they've made in a really exploitative or unconscious way, but how to organize an entire way, a paradigm, for lack of a better word, that's not about these same power structures. It's very difficult, and it's unlikely to come from a company. I think we're looking for the economy as it is to solve all the problems. Why is that our only way? Why has it come down to the movement of money? It's really, that is a lack of imagination to me. Maybe it's always been like that, but I just have to imagine that there's some example of some group of humans somewhere who has recognized, maybe it's AA, it's recovery groups, right? Those are run on volunteers and donation, and it's that kind of initiative where people are deciding to organize their lives differently. So maybe it's a recovery model that I'm looking for that has no interest to Wall Street, but it's real. I mean, you can't say that because AA, the whole recovery movement in general, just the 12-step model, hasn't done something for a large number of people's lives, and yet you can't measure it monetarily, and there's no CEO and there's no fundraising. It's just all proactive member participation and organization, self-organization within micro communities. That's amazing. And yet, and yoga in this country started like that, right? It was, very, very um, grassroots, done in people's homes because there were no yoga studios. I remember in 1998 being introduced to yoga in my gym in Ann Arbor as a fitness class. That was the only way I would have tried it, because I had a perception that all yoga was sort of like religious recruitment in disguise, and that I would have to be converted in order to do this practice, because it had that image at the time and you couldn't access it. And so after that, in 1998 was when I really started to tune into the fact that there were these yoga studios in the towns that I was living in. I started to seek them out, and it was still branded. The ones that I could find were branded like Bikram or Ashtanga or whatever. And so there was more of a pure lineage happening because those were the only trainers. And then if you look at the graph of 2008 to 2018, the hockey stick shape of number of yoga teachers that have been trained and yoga studios that have opened in the United States, you see the birth of an industry, which means you're churning out teachers at a rapid rate. There's many, many ways to train, so you don't know what you're getting when you hear yoga. There's many possibilities. You have to actually inquire or actually try the class to know what you're getting. And for me, that way of accessing yoga has become a lot less desirable. And I feel lucky that I had one particular teacher when I came to California who was an Iyengar trained teacher, and she had a very pure lineage through her teacher, Ben Thomas, who had spent time in India and with Sri Patabi Joyce, and went back every year and had a very small practice group in his home for many years every week, which is where he harvested his students and then selected them for teacher training. And so it was a very pure lineage where it was just like organically whoever found him and then whoever showed dedication got the teacher training over a period of years, not a weekend, not a week, not months, but years. And I also had a teacher who had similarly gotten it, yeah, at the time. So if you were studying yoga in the late 1990s through early 2000s, because I saw it explode starting in like 2011, but to 2010, like early 2000s, you were still getting the teachers that mixed in with others, like the Baron Baptiste people that was starting to come out. And I went to some yoga conferences, yoga journal conferences at that time. So you were seeing the start of the popular gurus, Sean Korn and God, I can't even remember the names of some of these people that had sort of risen up. But they all had to get their training in India or elsewhere where the lineage was. Then they came here and started building their following, leveraging that. And then their followers created their own training programs. And that's kind of the pyramid of how it spread, because that's capitalism. That's the American way of empowering people to do it their own way. And there's beauty. Obviously, I embrace a lot of those ideas. But the downside or the thing we lose in that is the selection process that comes with having people who are dedicated to something and go deeply into the study of something over time and become molded by a teacher who's truly dedicated to those principles, which can often become pathological narcissism because they have to really assert their rightness and they have to really take possession of their students as